So what is DISC and what is its mission? Well, in short, DISC aims to provide students with a global perspective on Islam and Muslim societies around the world. It achieves this by developing and coordinating a broad curriculum in Islamic studies across the Big Ten Academic Alliance via synchronous video conferencing and distance learning technology. Thanks to the work of DISC, since 2014, students across the Big Ten campuses have had access to courses that highlight Islam's regional diversity and the breadth of both contemporary and historical Muslim experience. This work is supported by a generous grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. DISC would simply not be possible without the generous support of the Mellon Foundation. Our annual Distinguished Lecturer is an extension of our mission. It supplements our goal of providing the Big Ten students and greater community with a more diverse perspective on the Islamic world. Each year, we invite a prominent scholar or public figure to speak on a topic related to Islam or the Muslim experience in various parts of the world, or their own experience as a Muslim. Dr. Eboo Patel is the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Corps, a nonprofit organization that is working to make interfaith cooperation a social norm in America. He is the author of 4 books and dozens of articles, has spoken on more than 150 campuses, and served on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council. Born in Mumbai, Dr. Patel grew up as an Ismaili Muslim in the western suburbs of Chicago, experiencing bigotry, but also taking inspiration from friends and neighbors from diverse backgrounds. As a student at the University of Illinois, he was involved in social justice work and soon came to realize that the leaders he respected most found their inspiration in faith. While earning a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, Dr. Patel began organizing interfaith projects around the world, laying the groundwork for what would become the Interfaith Youth Corps. Over 2 decades, he has led the organization from a handful of volunteers to a nationwide nonprofit that empowers students and educators on almost 600 U.S. college and university campuses. Dr. Patel is recognized as a key voice in national discussions around religious diversity and civic engagement. His contributions include books such as Out of Many Faiths, Religious Diversity and the American Promise, and op-eds and writings that have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Inside Higher Education, and the Chronicle of Higher Education, as well as interviews on National Public Radio and the PBS NewsHour. Dr. Patel has graciously agreed to share his experience and perspective with us tonight in his talk, American Muslims in the Era of Islamophobia. For this, we are both honored and grateful. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eboo Patel, the 5th annual DISC Distinguished Lecturer. Thank you. We can't. Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, I am honored and grateful to be here, and I'm struck that the audience here shows the depth and breadth of commitment and interest in this vision and topic. Thank you so much for inviting me to share with you. So I want to begin actually with an event that takes place January 21st, 2017. You might remember January 20th, 2017 was the election, the inauguration of one Donald Trump. And the next day, Aziz Ansari hosts Saturday Night Live, and here is about a minute of his opening monologue. All right. So this is a good thing, right? On one of the largest kind of pop culture platforms in America, maybe in the Western Hemisphere, you've got a prominent figure who is offering at least a little bit of information about Islam, that it's the same God as in Judaism and Christianity. He's being playful, he's being whimsical, and he's out there to say, we're amongst you and we're your friends and neighbors. And about 6 months later, Mr. Ansari drops season 2 of his Netflix show, Master of None, and the opening monologue, the opening of episode 3 is called Religion, and it opens thus. Here's my question. I'm going to switch back here to my PowerPoint. All right, here's my question. Is Aziz Ansari good for the Muslims? So let's kind of walk through the tension, the obvious tension in these two scenes, right? Here he is a prominent figure pop culture figure of the United States, prominent stand-up comic, a prominent author. He is using his platform, which is probably the biggest platform you can get in popular culture, the day after Donald Trump is inaugurated, in which you have a camp, to state the obvious, a presidential campaign that is in partly run on Islamophobia. You've got an American pop culture figure who has a Muslim background, who is publicly identifying as Muslim and is offering some basic kind of friendly Muslim outreach, basically saying we're your friends and neighbors, and our theology at the very basic level, the God we believe in is the same God that many of you believe in. And not even 6 months later, his pop culture series Master of None comes out, in which he proudly and openly eats pork to the soundtrack of music that no Muslim parents want their kids listening to, at least with that particular word in it, right? Is Aziz Ansari good for the Muslims? So one of the contentions that I'm going to be making in the course of this talk is that Islamophobia is reshaping Muslim identity and community. Interesting fact, Aziz Ansari's been a public figure in America since at least 2007, right? I think that's when he had his first sketch show on MTV. He was a stand-up comic in the club scene in New York before that. In the 10 years before 2017, he had almost never talked about being Muslim. There's a big New Yorker profile on him a couple of years before 2017, which is to say a couple of years before the presidential campaign of 2016 and 17, which makes, I think, zero mention of him being Muslim. And here he is in Saturday Night Live talking, at least in rudimentary terms, about Islam and the pride he takes in this background. He writes a New York Times op-ed a few months before Saturday Night Live, talking a little bit about his parents being Muslim and his fear about his parents going to the mosque, right? Very interesting. Aziz Ansari, and it's not like 2007, there was zero Islamophobia, but certainly not as much as there was around 2016 and 2017. Very interesting that Islamophobia provides an opening, perhaps a catalyst, maybe even something of a requirement for Aziz Ansari to register his Muslimness. And at least in some of those ways, most Muslims would consider it positive. We're your friends and neighbors. Our theology and belief system is similar to yours. And in other ways, like eating pork proudly and openly on Master of None, it's something that lots of Muslims would feel very, very conflicted about, right? This, by the way, let me just state the obvious. This isn't eating pork in private, personally. This is like eating pork in public when your mom says, don't do that, we're Muslim. And the rest of that particular episode is basically Aziz Ansari lying to get around the fast during Ramadan, including prayers on Eid, to go eat pork at a pork festival. And the end of that episode, episode 3, season 2, Master of None, is a set of parallel shots. Aziz Ansari's parents at Jummah prayers at a mosque where there's this kind of beautiful fellowship of Jummah, and Aziz personally enjoying the fellowship of a wine tasting. I would say there are two of the kind of key, both theological, but also social and community principles within most Muslim circles is you don't drink alcohol and you don't eat pork, right? It's theological in many interpretations, and it's communal. And people who do it tend to do it in private, right? A Netflix show is not private. I ask again, is Aziz Ansari good for the Muslims? And a question that hovers above all of this is, what are the ways that Islamophobia is reshaping Muslim identity and community, right? Does Aziz Ansari talk about being Muslim at all in the New York Times or in Saturday Night Live if it's not for Islamophobia? Probably not. He hasn't before that. Why is he doing it now? And how should other people who are Muslim view that discourse? A friend of mine who is involved in what I call Muslim internal institutions, which is to say involved in a masjid, involved in a Muslim religious education program, involved in the Islamic Society of North America, community institutions that Muslims have built to nurture their identity, right? Particularly identity that they view as closely tied to doctrine and theology. He's told me Muslims these days face a choice between keeping their kids safe and keeping their kids pure. Aziz Ansari is helping keep Muslim kids safe, right? The idea that Muslims are not a threat, Aziz is dispelling that a little bit. Right? I'm sorry. The idea that Muslims are a threat, which is put out there by the Donald Trumps of the world, Aziz is dispelling that. We're your friends and neighbors. And one of the ways he dispels that is by doing things that Muslims, especially those involved in Muslim community institutions, consider a violation of Islam. These are two women in the podcast called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And I think that they broadly fit in with the question that that Aziz Ansari's presence poses to us, which is, how is Islamophobia reshaping Muslim identity and community? So this quote is actually taken from an NPR piece on them. What is a good Muslim anyway? It's Zara Nurbaksh on the left and Taz Ahmed on the right. And interestingly, Zara, part of what they do in their podcast is they say, we are going to disrupt every narrative out there of what it means to be a good Muslim or a bad Muslim. We're going to disrupt a Western narrative, a quote-unquote Western narrative around this. We're going to disrupt the Islamophobic narrative around this, but we're also going to disrupt what they call the patriarchal narrative within Muslim community institutions. So Zara Nurbaksh is prominently written for NPR, for Bitch magazine, etc. She called herself the pork-eating, alcohol-drinking, premarital sex type of Muslim. Back to the question, right? Do Muslims involved in internal Muslim institutions face a choice between keeping their kids safe, people writing about Islam in a friends and neighbors type way on an NPR show with 5 million listeners? That's a normalizing, keep your kids kind of safe kind of thing. And there are, I would say, almost no Muslims involved in mosques and in Muslim schools and in organizations like ISNA who would say being a pork-eating, alcohol-drinking, premarital sex-having Muslim is a Muslim way of being, believing, or belonging, which is how most sociologists kind of define what it means to broadly participate in a religious community, the valences of being, believing, and belonging. So I think one of the things that we learn from examples like Aziz Ansari and Zara Nurbaksh and Taz Ahmed is responding to Islamophobia is a way of being Muslim. So let's go to this next point for a second because we'll circle back to the broader theme in some of the details here. Leon Wieselter, the literary critic and kind of public intellectual who ran the New Republic for many years, he once said, before 9/11, no one was talking about Muslims. After 9/11, everyone was talking about Muslims. Well, he's wrong in a very important sense. Before 9/11, lots of people were talking about Muslims. They were Muslims involved in internal Muslim institutions. They were the khatib giving the sermon at Friday prayers. They were the speakers at the Islamic Society of North America. They were writers for Horizons, ISNA's magazine. They were preachers who would go around the country and speak at Muslim conferences. They were people who had started Muslim schools. There were lots of people talking about Islam, but they were Muslims within Muslim institutions. The broader American public becomes interested in Islam after 9/11. One of the things I want to get to over the course of this talk is, who is the discourse of the Aziz Ansaris, the Taz Ahmeds, and the Zara Nurbakshes aimed towards? Is it aimed towards Muslims within Muslim institutions, within the ISNAs of the world, within the Muslim schools of the world, within the masjids of the world, or is it aimed principally outside of those institutions? And how should people within those institutions view these figures? How much of it is this tension between keeping your kids safe and keeping your kids pure? I want to talk for a minute about ideas of purity, social control, and exclusion. And I want to do this through a personal story. So I was at ISNA about 10 years ago at the conference. It's the largest gathering of Muslims in North America. 10, 20,000 people. Sometimes when big-time speakers speak at ISNA, 30 or 40,000 people will show up to see a Sheikh Hamza Youssef or an Imam Zaid Shakir speak. So I'm there. I've given a talk. I've been on a panel actually with Sheikh Hamza Youssef, who's amongst the most known figures within American Islam, at least inside American Muslim institutions. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And I hear somebody shout 15, 20 feet away from me in my general direction. And I turn around and there is a woman who is wearing a headscarf, appears, to be in about her mid-50s. I was in my mid-30s at the time. And she is yelling at me from halfway across this hallway filled with dozens and dozens of people, "Hey, you with earrings, you." I tell my sons, yelling at me, people are turning and looking. I tell my sons not to wear earrings. It is not an Islamic thing to do. It is something that those Americans do. Why are you wearing earrings? Why are you setting a bad example? One of the things that struck me about this is she didn't appear to me to think that she was doing anything strange. And none of the dozens of people who turned to watch looked aghast. This looked like a totally normal scenario in this world, which is to say, in an elder figure or an authority figure, even though I had given a talk, it had been undoubtedly on the sociological experience of Muslims, nothing about theology, of which I am not an expert, nothing about Muslim law, again, which I am not an expert. I am probably closer to, although, my public discourse, I would never do many of the things that Zara Nurbaksh or Aziz Ansari does. I'm probably fit a category closer to them, which is to say much more of a public figure than an inside the Muslim community figure. Within the Muslim community, this woman had authority, and she had an idea of which identities belonged and which identities were dangerous. And a man wearing earrings was not proper decorum, proper adab. And she was not shy about pointing it out. And nobody who witnessed that encounter was especially surprised about that. That's part of how that community rolls, right? This community of which I am a part rolls. Let me point out, this is not like a single mosque with 100 people where everybody knows each other. And when I have gone to those places, I've been asked on several occasions to remove my earrings, which I do. I consider it a matter of respect. And frankly, if I thought twice about my earrings before leaving my hotel room that morning, I would have removed them also, right? My earrings are a minor aesthetic matter in my life. They're not a matter of conviction, and I shouldn't have worn them. This particular circle has a very clear idea about proper decorum and an idea of who's excluded. Of an idea of how to maintain that, and partially what it takes to maintain proper decorum is certain forms of social control and certain exclusions. And so to again raise the question, right, in this idea that Islamophobia is creating new ways of registering Muslim identity, I am deeply sympathetic to the notion that there are Muslim parents like me at this point with Muslim kids who are happy that Aziz Ansari is a broadly welcomed figure who is registering his Muslimness, and very concerned that part of the way he is presenting himself as somebody who proudly eats pork and drinks alcohol. What do I tell my kids? And at the same time, one thinks to oneself, at least I do, what is it about how this community has functioned that has required Islamophobia to allow for the registering of Muslim identity by a set of Muslims? Aziz Ansari is a very talented guy. Zara Nurbaksh and Taz Ahmed are very talented people. Why couldn't they find a place in Muslim communities before this? They clearly feel a connection to that identity. Why did it take the emergence of Islamophobia for them to be able to register their Muslimness? There might be some opportunism involved in this, but honestly, Aziz Ansari could have filled that 9.5-minute Saturday Night Live monologue with plenty of jokes. He didn't have to. Offer America a civic lesson about Islam. Okay? Are there ways that Muslims have run their internal institutions that have excluded people that they should have found ways to include? And at the same time, I want to maintain this kind of balance of, doesn't a community have a right to run its institutions in a way that maintain its identity the way that they think is correct, especially when that identity, those patterns of being, believing, and belonging are connected to salvation? A deep, deep tension. Let me move on here. So this is my friend Hind Maki, actually formerly staff at IFYC. She runs a great Twitter feed. She also did a project called Side Entrance, in which she took photographs of the entrances, the side entrances that women had to enter into mosques, and the much smaller spaces made for women in mosques, right? So what's she doing here? She's basically saying, here are ways that women have been excluded in Islam in just very physical ways, in obvious ways. Look at this, right? Here are ways that women have been excluded, and I'm going to register this experience. I'm going to register this unfairness, right? And so part of what I want to point out is that there are the manner of exclusion is not simply on the lines of observance, right? Whether you pray 5 times a day, whether you eat pork or drink alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. It's also on matters like gender. And in this next clip, I want to highlight that it's not like all women in Islam are united on things. So this is a clip from a documentary called "The Muslims Are Coming." So this is the trailer. The actual scene that I want to highlight in the film, it's about an hour into the film, is Negan Farsad at this nightclub. I think it's a bowling alley / nightclub, telling sex jokes about her sex life, right? The kind of grind up against my side kind of thing. And a group of headscarf Muslim girls in the back, teenage girls, look at each other, start to whisper, and get up and leave. And the thing that you just saw, which is Negan Farsad saying, I wish more people within the Muslim community supported me, right, and my way of doing things. This guy, Omar Alba, saying, I wonder what Muslims are going to think of this comedy show. Like, are they going to recognize us as Muslim? A couple of basic things I want to say about this. One, clearly not all Muslim women agree. Many might feel excluded, but Negan Farsad is registering her Muslimness by narrating a social experience of sexual expression. And there are lots and lots of Muslim women who are like, that is not what we do. And if that is what you are going to do, I am going to get up and leave. So the thing that struck me was in this show, in this movie, you see Soledad O'Brien, you see Jon Stewart, you see Asif Manvi. Who is this made for? Who's the movie made for? This is not a movie that's shown in mosques and at ISNA. This is a movie made for college campuses and film festivals and Whole Foods America, right? It's a movie with people who have lifestyles like Negan Farsad, right? And so it is interesting that Negan is the one who is interviewed after the incident where the teenage Muslim hijabi girls walk out. She's the one that gets to say to the camera, I wish that my community supported my lifestyle. Those Muslim girls weren't interviewed. Okay? A huge part of what I want to point out here is that before 9/11, and especially before the Trump era, most Muslim content was made by Muslims within the Muslim community for other Muslims. In the era of Islamophobia, starting in the aftermath of 9/11, right, getting dramatically intensified in the Trump years, people who want to claim a Muslim identity through a set of experiences that they call Muslim get to speak. And the audience that they have is an audience outside of internal Muslim institutions. Yet they are affecting the shape of the community and the identity of the people within Muslim community institutions. And sometimes those two things are oil and water. Sometimes the hijabi Muslim girls see an advertisement, Muslim comedy, come expecting one thing, see another thing, and leave and say, this is not us, right? And it's a very interesting question to ask, who gets to speak to the camera and interpret that experience afterwards? Negin Farsad is interpreting it by saying, being an outspoken liberal feminist in the way that I am, that's a legit Muslim way to be, and Muslims should support my lifestyle and narration more often. One wonders, I have a reasonably good guess, but one wonders what those young hijabi Muslim girls might say to the camera about Negin Farsad's narration of her experience and her registering of her Muslim identity. I actually think one of the most interesting parts of what's happening right now is that those two groups are in the same scene at all. Yes, there's a ton of tension, but they're in the same scene. In effect, Islamophobia is forcing them into the same scene, right? And I want to tell a story along these lines. That's another personal story. It happens to be about my wife, and it kind of gets to a little bit about where I'm going to go in 10 minutes or so, the end of this talk, which is, what does it look like to create a Muslim community that is able to welcome and absorb the Negin Farsads and the young Muslim girls who leave that bowling alley nightclub, right? Who can welcome and absorb the Aziz Ansaris and the people who are like, I will show my Saturday Night Live monologue to your Saturday Night Live monologue to my kids, but not your Netflix show. Right? How do you build a community identity that can kind of have both? So here's my wife's story. My wife's a civil rights attorney, a deeply devoted Muslim, not especially observant, has the faith deep in her heart. I know this because we've been married for 15 years. I know how she orients around it, and feels excluded by many mosques for the side entrance type thing that Hind shows, and for general reasons of feeling that they're patriarchal outfits. In the early 2000s, a very conservative mosque group in the south suburbs of Chicago, by conservative I mean the kind of mosque group where men don't shake the hands of women, where the side entrance to the women's part of the mosque is especially small and unimpressive, et cetera, right? The kind of mosque where my wife would never pray, and where they really don't want people like my wife showing up. They buy a school and a community center in a south suburb of Chicago, and the city council blocks them. Makes up all kinds of excuses, but the bottom line is it's Islamophobic. And my wife's a civil rights attorney, and somehow they find out about this and they approach her, and she takes the case. And she goes to court, not wearing a hijab, which she never wears except for the very few days she goes to a mosque for prayers, like on Eid, wearing her modest skirt suits. Basically, my wife is my wife. I see her grit her teeth as the men who lead this Muslim community are shaking the hands of the other attorneys, even though this is my wife's case. She's up and down. She's doing the arguments. She is like a nationally known expert in this stuff. She feels some deep commitment to the thriving of a Muslim group which she would never want to be a part of. She considers it a part of her Muslimness to defend this group. In a time before 9/11, she is not taking this case. Right? In the era of Islamophobia, one of the ways that she expresses her Muslimness is by coming to the defense of a mosque foundation which would never want her as a member and of which she would never want to be a part. For me, there's a set of interesting dynamics and questions there, right? Islamophobia is an opening for Muslims, for a set of people with a connection to Muslim identity, but who have felt exclusion from Muslim institutions to register their Muslimness. And those people are increasingly in the same scene in ways that are clearly filled with tension, but also I think filled with beauty. I think it is a beautiful thing that my wife takes this case, that there is a way of connecting, right? And it's something that wouldn't have happened before 9/11. A couple of other examples here. Can we go back to this? Back to the PowerPoint. So this is Mahershala Ali, great actor, and a few years ago wins the Screen Actors Guild Award for Best Supporting Actor in Moonlight. He also wins the Academy Award. He wins an Academy Award also for his role in, The Green Book. He gives an impassioned speech about being a Muslim in the Screen Actors Guild Award. So he kind of comes out as a Muslim, right? It's not broadly known before that he's Muslim. I didn't know he was Muslim before that. He gives an impassioned speech about being Muslim, and when he wins the Academy Award, it's a bigger deal, right? First Muslim to win an Academy Award. Pakistan's envoy to the United Nations tweets out a congratulations and then deletes the tweet. Want to know why? Mahershala Ali is an Ahmadi Muslim. He is a part of a small theologically minority group in Islam that is excluded in all sorts of ways. Pakistan's constitution defines Ahmadis as non-Muslims. Ahmadis are not allowed to do the Hajj. That is stunning, right? They're not allowed to do the Hajj. And so here is an Ahmadi Muslim who is the first Muslim to win an Academy Award, who gives this impassioned speech about being having embraced Islam and how much Islam has done for him in the Screen Actors Guild Award, and Muslims are kind of conflicted about this. What do we say, right? We're glad that the broader public is seeing the talent of Muslims, although he's a guy that plays a gang figure in a movie about a gay kid finding his sexuality, plays a father figure role, even as this gang leader to this gay kid. We feel conflicted about that. We feel conflicted about him being an Ahmadi. If we embrace him, are we embracing Ahmadis? Oh, and by the way, he's black, right? And there's a number of writers, including one of your faculty members, Suad Abdul Kabir, who points out, there's a bunch of immigrant Muslims, Aziz Ansari, Riz Ahmed, whose public personas have also not been particularly quote-unquote Islamic, who have been embraced by the broader Muslim community, even though they have done things, as we saw in the Aziz Ansari case, that are certainly outside of the realm of Muslim being, believing, and belonging. But we're conflicted about an African-American guy, right? Another dimension of Muslim tension, the race dimension. So I want to end with two big ideas. So everybody is familiar with this poster, right? This is Shepard Fairey's series, We the People. Interesting that he chooses a Muslim figure as kind of an archetypal figure here, right? Interesting when you think about there's a variant of conservative America that has kind of created this dystopian fantasy of what Muslims are like. Muslims are threats. Muslims are coming to get you. Muslims are terrorists, right? They've kind of created this imagined figure of the Muslim as threat. Well, what does this poster represent? This is the progressives' imagined figure of Muslims as hero. Who is Negin Farsad making her film for? Who is Aziz Ansari making Master of None for? Progressives have an outline of who they want. I should say we, because I consider myself mostly a progressive. Progressives have an outline of who progressives want Muslims to be. There's no clearer idea of this than is presented in an archetypal poster, right? This is who progressives want Muslims to be, and they want to lift up and tell the stories of the Zahra Nurbakhshs, of the Taz Ahmeds, of the Aziz Ansaris. Look, isn't this what we want Muslims? Aren't you the resistance-oriented people? Aren't you the people who stand up for all minority rights? Aren't you people who embrace all the values that we kind of believe marginalized people should have, anti-racism and feminism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And people like Linda Sarsour, who I'm friendly with, has a lot of attention in the post-Trump era, leads the Women's March, right? Is profiled in magazines all across the country and the world. By the way, Linda is the furthest thing from an opportunist, by which I mean the work that she was doing after Trump's election was the work that she was doing 10 or 12 or 15 years before, right? Where does all the attention come from? Because she fits almost perfectly in the poster. Progressive America wants a certain type of Muslim. They will go find that Muslim and lift them up, right? But the Linda Sarsours of the world, again, who I have great respect for and am certainly friendly with, right? And there's no kind of comment on opportunism here, only in the attention that's gotten after 9/11 is an attention that's gotten after the Trump movement is in part because there's an audience for a certain type of figure. And those figures, whether they emerge right after Trump, right, and Aziz Ansari discovering his Muslim identity right after that, or if they've been doing the work for a long time and now get vaulted to world status, it's in part because an audience is looking for a certain figure. We would be mistaken to think that this is the only figure, right? That you listen to Fresh Air and you think Zahra Nurbakhsh, this pork-eating, alcohol-drinking, premarital sex-having, by her own words, type of Muslim is the only type of Muslim, right? You go to Whole Foods and you pick up a copy of The Advocate magazine, and Linda Sarsour has an article in there about how Muslims in the LGBT community are natural allies. It would be a grave mistake to believe that those are the only types of Muslims. This is a picture of Sheikh Hamza Youssef, is the guy with the goatee, and Robert George of Princeton University, widely known intellectual conservative Catholic, one of the most prominent pro-life and anti-same-sex marriage voices in the country, on a tour called Abrahamic Traditions in the Era of Feeling. Okay, so part of what this is about is a rebuke to the people, not directly, but an indirect rebuke to the people who are registering their experience as the definition of being Muslim. Anybody born to a Muslim family who navigates America in the era of Islamophobia gets to register as being Muslim in the idea of a Zahra Nurbakhsh. In the idea of a Sheikh Hamza, there's theological standards, there's behavioral standards that define what being Muslim is, and anybody who has some kind of familial connection and seeks to narrate their experience, you can't, that is suspect. Certainly wouldn't go as far as to say, I don't think that doesn't count, but there are theological standards. There are standards of tradition that we live up to that are defined by God and his prophet and his holy book. And that's how we roll, right? So you don't, I suppose I can't stop you from having a podcast if other parts of America are going to listen to it, but I'm certainly going to articulate a line of orthodoxy. And I think the future of Islam in America, for decades and decades and decades, it was people like Sheikh Hamza who had the stage and the audience to himself. And by the way, I'm more than friendly with Sheikh Hamza. I view him as a mentor. I have great regard for him, right? So any of the people I know personally in this PowerPoint, I am friendly with and I have respect for. And part of what I want to put on the table is, how are all of us, right, the Aziz Ansaris and the Sheikh Hamzas, the Zara Nurbakhshis and the Mahershala Alis, how are all of us going to create together American Islam? What does that look like? What does it feel like, right? Because one day this era of Islamophobia is going to pass, and the kind of quiet grumbles about people who fall outside of theological decorum, let us say, but are prominent voices registering Muslim experience, those tensions are going to become much more fraught, right? Those women who walked out of Megan Farsad's show where she talks about her sex life are going to take a camera and tell people exactly what they think of Megan Farsad instead of kind of quietly going into the dark and saying, you do your thing, I do my thing. What does it look like for us to be what I call a big tent citizen community? Big tent, welcome anybody who takes the Shahada, like the most basic theological standard in Islam, and who thinks of themselves as Muslim. There are arguments within the tent, but people are not denouncing each other out of the tent. There's a recognition that it's internally diverse on a whole set of things, on gender, on race, on theology, on levels of observance, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that gets you out of the tent is wanton violence, right? That's what gets you out of the tent. Otherwise, we're a big tent community. By citizen, I mean people who seek to contribute to the nation that we are a part of. As the founders of MPAC like to say, our principal civic commitment is not to the place where our grandparents are buried, but to the place where our grandchildren will be born. What does it look like to pay attention to the dynamics that are taking place in the United States to seek to be positive contributors to that? So I want to end with a final video, which is what I think is the best example of Big Tent citizen Islam in the United States. It happens to be in my backyard of Chicago, founded and run by a friend and somebody I have great admiration for, Rami Nashashibi. I think a Big Tent citizen Islam is going to look a little bit, this is one form that it will take, and I'll just close with this video. It's going to look a little bit like what Iman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, does with events like taking it to the streets.
Again, would everybody please join me in thanking Dr. Patel for his very stimulating and I think kind of disturbing speech in many ways. Gave us a lot to think about, a lot to digest, and I wish we had time for questions, or I wish we had the opportunity for questions. We went to live stream due to our experience sort of last minute with the spread of the coronavirus, and don't really have the capacity to have a question and answer session, at least not live stream, so I apologize for that. But I want to thank Dr. Patel for just a very stimulating and thought-provoking and I think very deep presentation, and for being here tonight. So thank you.